Welcome back to the All Elite Wrestling Draft, where we try to speculate and predict where these recent WWE releases head. Do they go to All Elite Wrestling or another promotion? On the Squared Circle Psychobabble, my name is Michael Valenti. This is Ralph Valenti. For news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling. Subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. So we did a recent round back on Sunday night. If you missed that, I'll put the eye above my head. Click the description below to check out that episode. But we got 5 more names to talk about on the recent releases from WWE. And we start this round with Rusev, which this guy was pretty freaking over a couple years ago with the whole Rusev Day thing. Had one of the best WrestleMania entrances with the tank against John Cena at WrestleMania 31. But for some weird reason, Vince McMahon just never pushed this guy the way he probably should have been pushed. And then he ended up in that whole love triangle storyline, which ended up being his last storyline in WWE. A lot of people say he might go to New Japan Pro Wrestling or might want to see him in New Japan Pro Wrestling. But I actually see him going to All Elite Wrestling with the New Japan Pro Wrestling clause, where he can go to both promotions, especially when Jake Hager tried to recruit him on Twitter. That tweet was later deleted. So I'm going to go with All Elite Wrestling with the New Japan Pro Wrestling clause.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I can definitely see him landing in All Elite Wrestling for one of the biggest reasons is he's a guy that definitely got over organically. It wasn't like it was one of those things where it happened years and years ago. Every time he came out, it seemed like every time he came back from injury or whatever the case may be, even if WWE decided not to put him on TV, he was over. The fans were behind him. They were chanting Rusev Day. They wanted to see him. They were invested in the storylines. As bad as the storyline was with him, Lana, Bobby Lashley, the whole love triangle thing, it actually drew ratings. And that's something that you can't deny. So assuming that Rusev still has the fans behind him, assuming that it's still somebody that the fans want to see now and not somebody that they wanted to see 5 years ago, 10 years ago, however long ago, and assuming he's still hot, which I got to believe he's going to be no matter where he debuts, I think that AEW is a good landing spot for him. I think he's a guy that they can utilize well. They can utilize his fame and his time in WWE, and they can also utilize him in the sense that he's a guy that wasn't overly exposed to the fans, because WWE, even though they didn't necessarily utilize him how a lot of people wanted to see him utilized, it wasn't like it was overexposure. It wasn't like he was forced down your throat because they deliberately, for whatever reason, didn't utilize him. So AEW can take that, use it to their advantage, and I think they'll be able to attract at least a small percentage of WWE's fan base or people that are interested in Rusev. So I think he goes to AEW.
Yeah, I'm going with that too. And if one thing maybe happens, Aiden English also got released, so maybe pair them up again and have Aiden English be his personal ring announcer and doing the whole sing-along again. I don't know what his name would be, Rusev, now that he's not in WWE, but they could work it out. Next up is Lio Rush, who was actually getting somewhat of a pretty good push in NXT when he went back down there, eventually becoming a cruiserweight champion. This one was a little bit of a surprise to be released here. I think this kid is going to end up in AEW and be pushed very well. I see a lot of Darby Allin in Lio Rush where you're not quite sure what it is, but there's something there. That star power is there. He's not exactly the biggest guy or the best wrestler, but he's very talented at what he does. He's very good on the mic. I definitely see him in All Elite Wrestling. And if not, he's going to run the indie circuit and make a lot of money there. So wherever he thinks he can make the most money, which I think is either AEW or the indie circuit.
Yeah, I think that he's actually going to work the indie circuit for quite some time. I actually think eventually he'll make his way back to the WWE. I think he'll go work some NXT because I know that's something that they're trying to promote is that cruiserweight division, whether it's between the UK or even here in the US. So I do think he'll work the indie scene. I think he'll be very successful there. Like you pointed out, definitely somebody who's very good in the ring, definitely somebody who's good on the mic. That being said, I would love seeing him in matches with guys like Sammy Guevara and Darby Allin. Maybe we will get that. Maybe we won't. I think he's going to work the indie scene for a while, though.
Let's move on to our next guy, which I think this was the most surprising release out of all the names mentioned. And that is Rowan, Erick Rowan, who in 2019, this guy was Daniel Bryan's lackey and had a big feud with Roman Reigns last year.
Yeah.
Then they did this whole thing with the spider, which I think was supposed to be a huge push for him. But of course, the reveal of the spider really killed that because it was stupid. But he gets released. I think this was just because they had nothing for him temporarily. But then once they get a full roster again and everyone's able to travel again, I could see him going right back to WWE really with no time spent.
Yeah, and I probably agree with that. It's difficult to tell because it's not like he had the buzz like Brody Lee had. Like he was somebody that you could easily see fitting into the Dark Order or a role like that. Granted, yeah, they can bring him in and pair him with Brody Lee in AEW, but I just don't think he has that type of following, and there's not that fan base that wants to see something like that happen. I can't see him anywhere else. When I try to think about it, yeah, maybe like NWA, I guess, but maybe Impact Wrestling. I don't know. But I think that in all likelihood, he ends up going back to WWE.
I think if he doesn't go to WWE, he might. I think it would be Ring of Honor, because Ring of Honor, let's face it, they really need some notable names and some guys with some WWE or AEW experience right now, because 2019 was not a good year for them. A lot of people left. Maybe they take advantage of all these releases and start picking some of these guys. I know we talk about All Elite Wrestling all the time, but Ring of Honor might be the sleeper in this whole thing and start taking some of these guys.
Now that you mentioned Ring of Honor, it might be interesting to see him in a role where maybe he's in Villain Club or something and working alongside Marty Scurll. It's actually difficult to predict things like that now because, we haven't seen it in so long. And you forget about how over guys like PCO was and guys like Marty Scurll and how he was going back and forth between NWA. And that might be a role for him where, he doesn't necessarily have to be the face or the voice of a group, where Brody Lee is a guy where right now, he's in a position where he has to be the face of an organization or a group. I don't know if Rowan is at that point where he can be the front guy or stand out on his own.
Right.
WWE gave him that chance. I don't know if it was necessarily successful. Some may say it was. I don't necessarily think it was, but maybe putting him in a faction like Villain Enterprises does make more sense.
It does. And especially now that you pull that up, maybe I should change my answer to Ring of Honor. Well, it's either WWE or Ring of Honor, but let's move on to someone that used to have experience in Ring of Honor. She was there before moving to NXT, and then part of the releases here is Deonna Purrazzo. I think she ends up in Impact Wrestling. I said this on the other episode, is that Impact Wrestling outside of WWE has the best women's division in the United States. I do think Deonna Purrazzo would like to stay in the United States. Maybe she does some stuff with Stardom, goes to Japan and does some stuff with Stardom. But if we're going to say here in the States, I'm going to go with Impact Wrestling. If not, she'll work the indie scene.
Yeah. I do agree with that. I do think Impact Wrestling is a good likely landing spot for her. Again, AEW, they don't want to just be taking talent just for the sake of taking the talent. Yes, she's talented. Yes, she's coming from the WWE, but at some point, I got to think if AEW is going to be taking guys or girls from WWE just for the sake of taking them, they're going to try to take people that have a name, that have that recognition. She didn't necessarily have that because she wasn't necessarily given the opportunity to work in front of large crowds like on the main roster. So I think Impact Wrestling is a better suit for her. So I think that's where she ends up too.
Yeah, and Deonna Purrazzo has a very close relationship with Chelsea Green, who had a big role in Impact Wrestling, and she's also engaged to another person that was released from WWE, and that is Zack Ryder. That's our last person in this round of the All Elite Wrestling draft. This one I think is going to be hard because this guy was in WWE for 14 years, a huge fan favorite with many, many people of the WWE universe, but never got booked or pushed the way people wanted him to be pushed. I mean, they were talking WWE Championship at one point with this guy. There was a point where this guy was getting "We Want Ryder" chants when The Rock was in the ring. So that's super, super over. And I know he does have a relationship with Cody Rhodes. I think Cody's going to use that to his advantage. He knows the potential Zack Ryder can have. I think he ends up in All Elite Wrestling.
See, I don't think that. The reason I don't think that is what all the things I said about Rusev are all the reasons why I don't see this happening. Zack Ryder was definitely very over at one time. That Zack Ryder was a guy who, very much like Daniel Bryan, got the fans behind him organically. That was a really long time ago, though, and that's part of the problem. You can't just expect, to bring somebody that was that over however many years ago, bring him into a new organization, expect him to get over to that same level. They're seeing that, I think, now with Matt Hardy. Now, certainly Matt Hardy can get over with the AEW fan base, and I think it certainly hurts that they don't have live crowds, so we don't necessarily know exactly how over he is with the fans because you can't actually gauge a reaction. All you can look at is the ratings and stuff like that, and we're in a pandemic right now, so I don't even know if you can look at those numbers and accurately assess that. But Matt Hardy, much like Zack Ryder, was over a long time ago. Can he get to that level again? It's possible. It's very hard in professional wrestling. They tried to bring the Yes movement back with Daniel Bryan, who was so over when he won the championship. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, they could bring Zack Ryder in. Is he going to be that successful? I'm not sure. Another guy you can look at too is Shawn Spears. I mean, he was a guy that, really talented. They brought him over from WWE because they saw something in him. He's talented. They're utilizing him now, but it's not like he's crazy over. Like there's something that's just not clicking, I think, with Shawn Spears.
But that could be because of his loss at All Out to Cody. If he beat Cody Rhodes at All Out, I think that could really change how the momentum of Shawn Spears really went. They will utilize him. And plus, with Ryder, he was such an over baby face that it might not take long. Like Shawn Spears, they booked him as a heel, so it's kind of hard to have him get over when he's a heel. Zack Ryder, I don't think he has a heel bone in his body, and it would be very odd to see him as a heel. He is definitely a very charismatic guy, and I think the people that back Zack Ryder are a lot of what AEW fans are in that demographic. So I could totally see it working with Zack Ryder.
All I'm saying is it's very hard in professional wrestling to strike while the iron's hot 2 different times in 2 different companies. Probably the best example of that is Hulk Hogan before he was Hollywood Hogan. WWE, he was obviously crazy over. He went to WCW. It worked for a little bit, but he started to get booed because eventually these things run their course. Very much the same thing with Bret Hart. He was one of the best there is, the best there was, best there ever will be, one of the top guys in WWE. Went over to WCW, didn't necessarily work. So that's the only point I'm trying to make. I think that they're going to start to become a little more selective, especially with guys like Zack Ryder that were over a long time ago, or what seems like a long time ago. I think Zack Ryder is going to work the indie circuit, and believe it or not, if he doesn't end up going back to WWE, I don't think we're going to see him wrestle very much in any prominent role. I think he's a guy that actually does take a step back, does maybe open up a school or something like that, because he has wrestled for quite a long time. Granted, he's still young. I don't know. I don't see that same character working in another organization unless he plans to work the indie scene. And, does he really want to do that? He's been with WWE so long. He's had a lot of fame. He's had a lot of good opportunities. I got to assume, unless he bought way too many wrestling action figures, he's got some money. So maybe he doesn't need to wrestle anymore, unless it's going to be in a big organization.
Well, I don't know how much his wedding with Chelsea Green is going to be, but I'm sure he can use whatever money he saved up with WWE. So we'll see. Only time will tell. If you missed the first round of our All Elite Wrestling draft this week, click the thumbnail on the screen right now or the link in the description. Tell us where you think these guys are going to go in the comments below. And don't forget to share this all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SCPB Podcast. And for news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. For Ralph Valenti, my name's Michael Valenti. Thank you for watching the Squared Circle Psychobabble.